Good afternoon. Welcome everyone to the first session of this term, Sunoikisis Digital Culture Heritage. And okay, sorry, I should probably close the YouTube window.
Works. There is no noise, Valeria, don't worry. I know the problem, but we just hear your voice.
Okay, that should be gone. Okay, so let's start again. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our first session of this fall Sunoikisis Digital Culture Heritage. And our first class will be on digital historical gazetteers, and our guest speakers are Ruth Master and Becker. But we also have here our Monica Berti that will bless this beginning of term, and Gabriel Baudard that is also our great master of the Institute of Classical Studies DigiClass. Just a few words to introduce this series of seminars. They focus on digital culture heritage, and that is intended in a very broad sense and covers, of course, its more material incarnations, so portable artifacts, but also representations of these artifacts and the discourse around the culture heritage itself, and what digital tools and digital methods and digital approaches can offer to the study, the preservation, the understanding, the promotion, the management of culture heritage. We will have quite a strong focus on geography and ancient geography, and that's why we start with Gazetteer. That will be, in a way, a little bit of the fil rouge through some of these sessions. So we will talk a lot about how a spatial reading, a spatial dimension in our understanding of ancient culture heritage and the ancient world can give us some particular insights into the understanding of past events and how they happened and what were the geographical variables that influenced them. We will also talk about 3D technologies, and we will cover 3D modeling but also 3D imaging and 3D printing, and in particular we will talk about how 3D printing can be used in teaching, in object-oriented teaching of ancient artifacts, ancient art, and so on. We will, of course, also talk about linked open data and the value of connecting information about culture heritage and connecting collections, digital collections in museums, in libraries, and so on, and the value of visualizing these connections as networks. We will have a class on network analysis as well. And we also want to talk a little bit more, and we had a session all about public engagement and how digital tools and methods can empower users to reappropriate their culture heritage, especially when they belong to some minority group, or if they feel that their culture heritage, this part, of course, of their own identity, is under threat or is somehow being taken over by another dominant culture. And for the first time, we will have one class all on, let's say, the more legal aspects of digital culture heritage. So we will talk about open access, and we will talk about copyright of culture heritage, if there is such a thing, and copyright of the reproductions of cultural heritage. So digital products that are inspired to culture heritage. And I hope that now you are all excited and curious, and you will be joining us every Thursday for all the other seminars. And I will ask now Gabby to say something more about the digital classics and the work that is done here at the ICS. And you have to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thanks a lot, Valeria. Yeah, thanks for organising this semester's Sunoikisis Digital Cultural Heritage module, which is, you know, a selection of very interesting topics as you've just described it. I think is going to be useful not only to our students but to all sorts of people who might watch this. Just to give a very brief background to this and how this fits into the bigger picture. This semester is part of this program called Sunoikisis Digital Classics, which Monica, who will say a few words in a minute, has set up 4 years ago now, I think. The way this module works is that this program works is very much on the model of a system that was set up in the US some 20 years ago, or well over 20 years ago now, called Sunoikisis, where the idea was that this was a federation, if you like, a collaboration between a couple of dozen different classics programs, or rather classical academics in different small colleges across the US, who may have had too few classicists in any given institution to have their own classics major, to have their own classics program, to offer entire courses on topics of ancient history, ancient literature, and so forth. But between these couple of dozen institutions and a couple of dozen individual scholars or small groups of scholars, they were able to collaborate and offer a very rich classics program every year. And they also had between them, even if some universities might have only had 1 or 2 students interested in this topic, they had between them a nice large cohort of students to make it worthwhile teaching this sort of thing as well. And this has been very successful and has run for many years and is currently coordinated by the Center for Hellenic Studies at Washington. But the Sunoikisis Digital Classics module program that Monica set up follows very much the same model, but is much more international and is centered in Germany, has several different German universities taking part, but also from, I think we at last count, 18 different countries in the world are involved, and some dozens of individual scholars participate in this. We now have 3 semesters worth of programming per year. The Digital Cultural Heritage semester that Valeria currently convenes, a Digital Classics language and text semester immediately after Christmas in January to March, that next year will be convened by myself and Maria Vieros from Helsinki, and then the summer Digital Classics module, which runs from about April to July, I think, that Monica convenes. And so that's sort of to put this in context. To put it into more immediate context, for us here at the Institute of Classical Studies, we teach 2 MA modules, that is individual courses that students take for 1 semester at a time. 2 students at the Institute of Classical Studies at King's College London Classics Department, University College London Classics and Ancient History Departments, and Royal Holloway Classics Department. We also are starting to have students from Birkbeck University, Classics and History and Archaeology as well. And these 2 modules are very closely based on the Sunoikisis sessions that we run in the first 2 of those semesters, so the fall and the spring semesters. And students will watch the Sunoikisis videos on the Thursday or Wednesday this week, but generally on the Thursday. And then, as Valeria said, they will have a seminar, a 2-hour seminar the following week on the Tuesday morning, where this will be discussed in more detail and some bibliography will be given, and they will do a digital project as part of this program. Many people watching this won't be students following this either in London or anywhere else in the world, but are watching as independent scholars or independent students, and they're welcome to try and do the exercises and so forth as well. But for our immediate context, we have our own students that we focus on. So I think that's about all I wanted to say. Probably more than Valeria wanted me to say.
That's great. Thank you, Gabby. And can I ask Monica to just?
Yes. Well, thank you very much for this introduction. And I can only say that we started this conversation, basically, the University of Leipzig and the Perseus project at Tufts University. We started this conversation 4 years ago with the Center for Hellenic Studies because they wanted to expand the program outside the United States. And so the idea was to start with Europe, Central Europe, and expand the program to the digital component, because the original Sunoikisis in the US is for teaching traditional classics. I apologize for this adjective, I don't like it, but they didn't have the digital component. So that's why we have Sunoikisis Digital Classics. At the beginning, we had only spring semesters or summer semesters, in the sense that I could run only a few weeks corresponding to the German semester. But now, thanks to the help of friends and colleagues in London, we can have 3 Sunoikisis semesters. This one in the fall, corresponding to the London academic calendar, and then 2 semesters, a spring semester and a summer semester in the new year. One early at the beginning, we will start, I think, at the end of January, so to cover academic calendars, especially in North European countries, also in the United States, and then the other semester from April to July to cover other academic calendars, for example, in Germany, in Italy, and in other countries. Because one of the challenges of Sunoikisis at the beginning was that we have many different academic calendars in Europe, and there is a difference between Europe and the US, so it was difficult. But I think that now we really have, well, 3 semesters, so many colleagues and students especially, they can join our program. And I'm very, very grateful, well, to Gabriel Bodar, because he started this mission, and now Valeria. Valeria, she contributed a lot in the past with many common sessions, teaching many common sessions, and now she's the leader of this whole semester. So really, thank you, because it's great. It's a lot of work. And as you know, we have a lot of material online, YouTube videos, and then class outlines, data, etc. And this material is online. We have a license, a CC license, and you can use in your classes our videos. So this is the goal of Sunoikisis. We are online now, but everything is online and you can use it. So, but now, so as a godmother of Sunoikisis Digital Classics, so I can bless this fall semester, and thank you. And I think we can start, because otherwise it's late.
Thank you very much, Monica. I feel now blessed, and I am absolutely delighted to introduce Ruth as the first speaker for today. And if you unmute yourself, Ruth.
Okay. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. Great. So let me introduce myself. My name is Ruth Master, and I'm Associate Professor of History at the University of Pittsburgh. I'm also the Director of the World History Center. And perhaps most important for our meeting today, I'm the Principal Investigator for the World Historical Gazetteer project. And I'm also a co-editor of the book Placing Names, Enriching and Integrating Gazetteers, which was a collection published in 2016. I've been thinking about historical gazetteers really throughout my whole career. When I was still a graduate student at UC Berkeley, I was involved with, I was research staff with a project called the Electronic Cultural Atlas Initiative. This was in the late 90s and early 2000s. And ECI was ahead of its time in many ways. It was a project to integrate cultural heritage and geospatial data using time and space with a map and timeline browser, with data sets that sat on servers anywhere around the world and were integrated through time and space as common denominators. And at this point, I mean, now almost 20 years later, this feels commonplace. We have the technology to do this. But when I started out in the late 90s and early 2000s doing this, it was really before a whole range of different cloud-based technologies, map browsers, linked data methodologies, ontologies, all of those things were still being worked out. And so really starting at that time, the question that I've been chasing, and for myself as a historian rather than as a developer, is how do we develop gazetteers that can serve as points of reference? So these kinds of cultural history data sets can effectively be shared in a way that is name neutral and language neutral, but allows us to use names as a point of common reference and to be able to crosswalk across many different versions of names. And so that's the sort of the background about what I do and why it is that I have considered this work so important for many, many years. It's really anchored a whole segment of my career. I should add that I'm not a classicist. My own specialty is in medieval China. But that, I think, is part of what has been so, I hang out with a lot of classicists, and the fact that I work on China and in a non-Roman script and as a world historian is also part of what motivates me to think about how and why it's useful to share information about place names across many different projects. So with that, should I start sharing my screen? And just quickly, I'm mindful of the fact that I have about 15 minutes. Is that right? A little less than that now?
Yeah, 15 minutes. It's great. Thank you.
And so I don't want to spend too much time on this, but I do want to talk through some slides that whoa, that's weird. Okay.
Yeah, no, that's all under control.
Okay, good. So, and the can everyone see this?
Yes.
Okay, great. So, the slide deck that I want to talk through for the next 10 or 15 minutes is actually one that I developed last spring for a conference I went to on French history. So, I'm going to be using some French. So in this class on cultural heritage for classics, and as a specialist on China, I'm going to be starting by talking about some French examples. So feeling world historical at this moment. And what I wanted to start out, I'm mindful that I'm the first speaker in the first session of this class for MA students. And so I want to start out, perhaps use all of my time, most of my time anyway, talking about why it is that gazetteers are so important. And so what I'm starting with here is the result of a Wikipedia search for Paris. And this is the disambiguation page. This is just the disambiguation page. And you can see that it lists 4 people, 3 mythical characters, dozens of places on 5 different continents, as well as albums, artworks, etc. A total of 33 different places named Paris. And so one of the reasons why not just a gazetteer, but as I'll be talking about, a network of multiple gazetteers is so important is that people need to be able to communicate across multiple projects about which Paris they're talking about. And this is another version of the same problem. So say you've decided that you're interested in the Paris that's in France. You might discover that you're talking about, or you have multiple sources, let's say, and I'm looking here at the geospatial entry point into the OCLC catalog, the library catalog. And what this is telling me is that there are dozens of different versions of just the Paris that's the Paris in France. It appears in different languages, different scripts. And so if somebody is going to be organizing let's say, a linked open data network organized around geospatial information, it's not just a technical problem, and it's not just a sort of a generic semantic problem. The question is, what sorts of data sets and sources do you need to be able to search across multiple languages? And that's another thing that a gazetteer can accomplish. And if I look at one of these, I think this is going back to the Wikipedia page. No, I think that's right. I was on the Wikipedia language page there. If I now look at the page that's specific to Paris, France, another thing that I learn is not only is it one of 33 Parises that Wikipedia knows about, and not only is it in English one of dozens of languages that Wikipedia knows about, but there's also a bunch of historical information about it, which then has many other place names immersed in it. So there's the Paris Basin, there's specific places in Paris like the Left Bank, there's previous versions of the same previous names associated with different regimes that are about the same place, like Lutetia, and so on. There's specific buildings, the Basilica of Saint-Denis. All of this is embedded in the concept of the Paris, France, which is one of those 33 Parises. And so the purpose of a gazetteer is to kind of make sense of this tangle of spatial references, names, languages, change over time, places embedded in other places, places of different types, places with different parents, and so on. That's the basic point of what a gazetteer is for. And here just kind of highlighting some of that information, the multiple different names that Paris was known about during the Roman imperial period. And now, right, and another reason why this is so important, I knew I was going to get to the OCLC slide, is that once we've decided that we're interested in Paris, well, why are we interested in it? It's because we want to find out more information about it. And that information might be library information, for instance, as you find out in OCLC. And so here is just a list of the works that OCLC knows about that are related to Paris. So there's 46,982 about Paris, France, and hundreds and dozens of others about specific places and specific events associated with Paris. At present, there is really not any way to organize this information. And short of a gazette, and this is one of 669 pages in OCLC about this. So, and one more question, one more challenge is that once you've decided that you're interested in Paris, you're interested in the Paris that's in France. Of course, there are also problems of what you mean by France over time. Many, many different geometries for the larger unit of France within which Paris exists. And so you need some kind of data structure that organizes this. And beyond that, you need probably to make sure that if you scale this up to a global scale and you scale it up to all of human history, you quickly recognize that this is not something that any one person's project, no matter how ambitious it is, can possibly accomplish, even at a very superficial level. And so what you really need is an infrastructure to bring multiple versions of these gazetteers to organize place names together. And so gazetteers are the sources that manage the problems that we've talked about. They're core infrastructure for the semantic web because they facilitate search and visualization across multiple projects and across different versions of names. They are literally the semantic basis for linking and sharing historical and heritage information. We interact with gazetteers all the time. We don't think about the word gazetteer. It's a kind of specialist word. Maps are much more sexy than gazetteers. Everybody is interested in historical maps. But in fact, in the digital age, maps are really just visualizations of information that is from gazetteers in many cases. And it's also really important to think about gazetteers because we as humanities people exist in a world of text primarily. We don't exist in a world of mathematically oriented maps of continuous space, the geos world, in the sort of the classic kind of triumvirate of different ways of thinking about space. We're Koros people. We're interested in names and regions, or we're Topos people. We're interested in relationships, and everything that I talked about with Paris at the beginning of this talk is about the Koros world and the Topos world. And so one of the things I most want you all to take away from this talk is the idea that we are not necessarily interested in maps at all if we're doing geospatial digital humanities. We need to start with where our sources start, and that is very, very often, predominantly for almost all projects, it's a world of names, regions, travels, itineraries, and relationships. And that's a world of gazetteers and other databases about places rather than maps. You may never make a spatial visualization for your project, or you may make it only at the very end of the project. Gazetteers are really the place to start for almost all of us. And the geos world was very short-lived also, but I think I'll leave that point aside in the interests of time. And so the next point I want to make, and can you tell me, I'm not watching a clock, Valeria. How am I doing?
You're doing great.
Okay, great. About how I'm not watching a clock. So about
yeah. No, I mean do you have still 5-10 minutes?
5-10 minutes. Okay, perfect. Yeah. Okay, yeah. So I'll talk for about 5 more minutes. And I'm just here elaborating on the idea of gazetteers being the sources that we use as historians and heritage people. These are the kinds of attestations we have that we use for making the kinds of historical projects that we tend to work with. On the left is the attestation of a place name in Oregon in the United States, where the government, the USGS, chose among several different possible versions of a name and attested one particular one as the recognized one in 1896. On the right, from my own research about medieval China, is a narrative of all of the changes that one particular prefecture went through over time, and all of the different names it held, all of the different administrative levels that it held. Neither of these is something that is really well accommodated on a map. These are the kinds of pieces of information that make a lot of sense in the database and not very much at all on a map. And then beyond that, what we want to do is get from having not just one of these, I mean, not each of us we should all be making our own specialist gazetteers for the vast range of digital heritage projects that we do. But then beyond that, for these really to be useful, what we want to do is link them together in a global web of gazetteers. And I think we're just getting to the point where that's possible. I wanted to call out the book that I mentioned before that I co-edited and that came out in 2016. Which is, or at least as of 2 years ago, is really at the edge of research about how to build gazetteers, how to use gazetteers for research, and how to link gazetteers together. Unfortunately, I've been communicating with Valeria about this. It's not open source, but I'll make a couple of chapters of PDFs available. And I wish it was open source. Let's leave it at that. So Pleiades, which you'll be hearing a lot about, I'm sure, during this whole semester, is an example of a fantastic, really groundbreaking gazetteer that was originally, like many of the examples I've talked about, created for the purpose of being an instantiation of one particular historical atlas, but was developed with the semantic web in mind. And I think really is the source that paved the way for a great deal of what came after. Pelagios, which you will also hear about, and I am certainly not the most expert person on this hangout in, then used the Pleiades Gazetteer as a sort of a backbone for being able to say, now we can search across many, many different collections using place as a point of common reference. And then in the interests of time and knowing that you'll be talking about this throughout the semester, I will simply say that I feel like these two projects together particular have completely kind of proved conceptually that it's possible to scale up to many gazetteers and many other heritage sources that are replete with place names, to being able to do search across different versions of place names and across different kinds of specialist material. And this is just by way of example, Darmsey, Digital Atlas of the Roman Empire, which is another version, an overlapping version of this same semantic world of classical data. All of these things can now be searched and used together. And linked open data is the methodology that allows us to do that. Again, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go into the details about linked open data other than to say that it's made it possible to do these kinds of projects. And very quickly, I'm just going to mention that I'm working on a project called the World Historical Gazetteer, absolutely using this Pleiades and Pelagios methodology, creating a spine of global names, approximately 20,000 names that we think will be useful to a very wide range of projects, and then a union index of other places and annotated items from any kind of specialist project that then makes it possible to link and use this together. And so lightly covering the whole world with names, polities, administrative district, also ethnonyms, language regions, and physical geography, with the idea that wherever somebody is doing scholarship in the world, there will be some kind of coverage of place names for it. Like Pelagios, starting with a historical atlas, cleaning it and moving along from there. And here I want to gratefully name check my colleague, Carl Grossner, who's the developer on the project, who's done all of this work, and doing matching and cleaning and allowing for global coverage. And this is an older slide. This is from almost a year ago, but here just to demonstrate that this idea of merging sources and establishing global coverage of historical names is possible. Also adding in, as I said, ocean currents, watersheds, etc. And so this is the basis of what this sort of spine looks like, to which we are now able to link partner data. And I would be happy to answer more questions about that during the Q&A, but now for the time being, in the name of time, I'm just putting these ideas out there, and let me thank you all for listening.
Thank you very much, Ruth. I'm sure there will be a lot of questions, especially about the World Historical Gazetteer, which is, I think, someone that everyone was really looking forward to. And now I give the spotlight to Jeffrey. Let me present Jeffrey to everyone that has to unmute himself. And all the classicists listening to this now, all the times that you have used Pleiades, and I bet they have been a lot, you have to thank Jeffrey for most of it.
Well, that's overly generous. Thank you for inviting me here. I'll just briefly introduce myself. I'm a Mediterranean archaeologist with a sort of a lot of hats worn in my professional life. I'm a field archaeologist interested in digging in the dirt. But in addition to that, having served in the past as acting director of the Ancient World Mapping Center at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, developed a strong interest in various things related to spatial documentation and modeling in the ancient Mediterranean. So as a map maker, and now as associate editor of Pleiades Gazetteer, among other things. I really appreciate hearing Ruth summarize the World Historical Gazetteer, and to sort of know that some of the conceptual challenges that we face with Pleiades, we share in common with Ruth and many other colleagues who are hacking away at these things elsewhere in the world. I'm going to try to share here this screen to show you a couple of pictures. I want to talk a little bit about sort of Pleiades as sort of a concept, and use that as a way to. Can you all see those slides? Use that as a way to sort of talk about some of the things that we're currently working on. So if you are a user of Pleiades or a contributor to Pleiades, or if you're completely new to that, to the Gazetteer, when you arrive at the Pleiades site, sort of you are instantly sort of introduced to sort of the model of how Pleiades works. And this is a screenshot from yesterday or the day before. So at present, you are told that there are 36,000 odd places, 32,000 odd names, and 39,000 odd locations. And in terms of organizing the digital gazetteer that is Pleiades, we think along these lines in terms of place, location, and name. And as a digital project, we really sort of, were born in a sense in the analog world of more traditional cartography, in that Pleiades develops from the Classical Atlas project, which was led by Richard Talbert at UNC from the late 1980s until 2000, the momentous year, of course, when the Barrington Atlas of the Greek and Roman world under Talbert's editorship was published. The Barrington Atlas sort of, had a long development, over 100 scholars wrangled by Talbert to pull together the maps and to publish the atlas. And during that time, of course, map making and the technology of cartography was changing, in that digital map making by the year 2000 was more of a going concern than it was in 1988, at least in the academic world, of course. So from a certain point of view, the year 2000 is not really an ending, but a beginning, in that it did see the birth of the print atlas, but it also launched important conversations about, where to now, in that the future of the data and sort of a lot of the unfinished threads of the project was sort of guaranteed by the creation of the Ancient World Mapping Center at UNC, where this idea of ancient world mapping on, paper and acetate met geographic information systems. And through the agency of Tom Elliott, the founding director there of the AWMC, the intranet, the World Wide Web, came into the conversation, in that there had to be a not just a forward path, but a home for the data. So the atlas itself, if you know it, you're familiar with it. If you don't, it's a large format print atlas, 102 maps. There's various scales. There's attention to ancient physical landscape reconstruction, and all the things that one would want in a historical atlas. But from the Pleiades point of view, importantly, there is the map by map directory, which accompanied the print atlas as a CD-ROM tipped into the back of the book, or if you sprung for the extra cost, as a print directory. And this is the data source, original data source for the Pleiades Gazetteer, in that all 102 maps have a bibliography, commentary from the map compilers, and then lists of toponyms, both those that appear on the map, or on the maps, excuse me, as well as those that are categorized as unlocated, names that are attested in ancient textual or epigraphic sources, but that cannot be physically placed on the ground. And so from a certain point of view, a lot of us that have been involved in Pleiades over the years, one of the things that we're most interested in is sort of uncertainty. Personally, the unlocateds are a prime source of interest of mine. And certainly the world of making digital gazetteers and digital visualizations offer possibilities for unlocatables that print maps don't. Goals. In terms of Pleiades, we're a community-driven, community-built project. Everyone who participates either in the editorial college, the reviewers group, or individual contributors are all volunteers, and the project is very much committed to open source data and following, Creative Commons attributions. I would say the main aim, if I had to say one about the Gazetteer, is that it aims to be authoritative. It wants to provide an authoritative listing for ancient Mediterranean and Near Eastern geography. That, of course, is a sort of stretchy concept, right? And the frontiers continue to move in terms of what data is included in the Gazetteer. Obviously, and Ruth has mentioned this in her presentation, Pleiades is important, or linked open data is important to Pleiades as well. And in that regard, Pleiades tries very hard to provide stable URIs for ancient places. And these URIs are the way that Pleiades data is able to communicate with Pelagios network projects, with Johann Alfeld's DARE Atlas, and others. And so we see this as a key service that Pleiades provides. And of course, being open source data, we encourage users to make use of Pleiades data and use it in their own work and in their own projects. Governing concepts. As we saw on the first slide, place, location, and name. This is sort of the hierarchy, if you will, inside of the Gazetteer, right? In that the conceptual entity of place governs the entire project, and that places can have these other attributes called location and names. And this, I appreciate what Ruth had to say about, do you ever actually make a map anymore? And I think that some classics colleagues that I speak with about Pleiades think instantly, oh, that it's a map. And, can you print out the map from the screen? And I guess in a sense, yes, you can. But I think our main interest is not in being a visualization tool. You can use the data to create visualizations, of course. Pleiades partner projects like Antiquity a la carte, developed by Dr. Ryan Horn, allow production of sort of maps for classroom and personal use based on Pleiades data. But we're really interested at the sort of first level in the creation of these relationships between places and their attributes, like locations and names. Location data that came from the Barrington Atlas by way of Michael McCormick's digitization of Barrington Atlas maps at Harvard, the digital atlas of the Darmsey Atlas, digital atlas of Roman and Mediterranean civilization, I believe. Of course, present challenges in terms of accuracy and granularity, and trying to continue to refine the spatial accuracy of data based on the Barrington Atlas paper maps continues to be something that we work on, and that we encourage contributors who want to refine the accuracy of location data to do so. Names, of course, we have lots of names that can come from the Barrington Atlas originally. We have worked to import data from TAVO, the Tübinger Atlas of the Near East, that with Eric Kanza and Francis de Blau of the Alexandria Institute, as well as other projects to import sets of names, and our own work to align Pleiades with other online name gazetteers like GeoNames, Wikidata in some cases. Connections is something that is exciting about Pleiades, especially in terms of trying to model relationships between places within the Gazetteer. And this is really an area where paper maps have little to no ability, but that the digital space has virtually limitless potential in terms of showing relationships between places, and including, of course, here modeling uncertainty, right? Taking places of uncertain location or unlocated in terms of latitude, longitude coordinates, but that might have a known surfaceable relationship with a larger place entity. And so connections, as well as sort of, both at the location level, finding, more precise pinpoint coordinates for a place and inputting them to the Gazetteer. Connections are sort of the second strongest tool for modeling space in the ancient world and creating links within the Gazetteer space. So, Valeria, am I okay on time?
Yes, you should have 5-10 minutes more.
Okay.
Is that all right?
Sure. I'm going to change screens here and hopefully take you over to the Gazetteer. Are you seeing the Pleiades landing page there?
Yes.
Okay. So I just want to talk about one of the things that Valeria had asked me about when she invited me here was to talk a little bit about uncertainty. And so I just want to take you to Rome here, hopefully, and sort of show you some of the things that we're trying to think about or do or affect in terms of building connections. And this, I think, is oh, that was weird. This is a growth area for us. Of course, the pace of growth is governed by how much energy and hours you have and to devote to it. But I think this is an area where a project like Pleiades will continue to grow even once, say, for instance, all of the locatable places have precise pinpoint coordinates entered in that I would say, from the classicist point of view, there's a virtually inexhaustible supply of sources that help one to think about connectivity in the ancient world. And so you're looking here at, this is the main place page for the city of Rome. On the little inset visualizer here, set against the ancient world mapping center's physical terrain developed by Ryan Horn, you kind of see the layers, in a sense, of Pleiades, in that the artifact of the map is still here, and I'm logged in as an editor, so you can see this blue bounding box is the original Barrington Atlas map footprint for, as you can see down here in the provenance, where are you? For map 43, right, which was the Rome map of the B Atlas. That's now not publicly surfaced in that we've retracted it in favor of other more precise data. There is still a representative point for Rome, this blue place marker here, which then, based on these connections, the little green place markers, is calculating a central point represented by the orange circle. And in effect, at this point, Rome's central point marker could almost be retracted, in that the space of Rome is modeled based on its connections. So things that Rome makes connections with, in this list, mostly territorial features, physical geography like the Tiber River, on a whole raft of Roman roads, as well as things that Rome receives connections from. And this is a place where Valeria's interests and ours, my own, really intersect in terms of increasing granularity of ancient places, right? For instance, you can see here at various stages of publications some specific topographical feature. So if we were to drill down to Meta-Sudans, right, we are taken to what is now an independent place, but that is related to Rome, right? And within Meta-Sudans, we find that Meta-Sudans has a location, in this case, one derived from OpenStreetMaps, has a connection, has some sort of summary information, should have some basic bibliographic information, which is now linked to the Pleiades Zotero group for managing bibliography. So that's one kind of connection. In other situations, right, there may be things that have place status that you want to connect that don't necessarily have a fixed location. So here's a tribe, right? This is the Tribus Arnensis, right? Which, as the summary tells us, a later royal tribe of Rome, established in 387. This is not a place that ever had a longitude, latitude, but nonetheless has a spatial component and is modeled here through connections. In this case, the Tribus Arnensis, which makes a connection with Rome and also receives connection from 4 places that are associated in historical sources with the tribe, gives us an approximated spatial sense or spatial extent of areas where the tribe is attested. In other situations, there are things that are unlocatable. Let's hope that we can find one here. Find and unlocatable. That's a good joke. This is an opportunity to take things from, say, the unlocated list of the Barrington Atlas map by map directory, or to take things that are attested textually, but that are not geographically locatable anymore, but nonetheless are interesting geographically, topographically, and worthwhile in terms of modeling. And I'm failing here to find a good example to show you. But this kind of increased granularity and modeling of uncertainty is sort of the forward path for a lot of this kind of work. Work on numerous sort of increasing granularity projects has been the focus of course-related Pleiades editing happening at a number of places. University of Texas at Austin under Adam Rabinowitz has been doing a good bit of this. University of Iowa, where students there of Sarah Bond, who's also part of our editorial college, have been interested especially in Augustan Rome, increasing granularity of Augustan Rome features within the Gazetteer. The Pompeii Herculaneum Ancient Graffiti Project under Rebecca Benefil at Washington Lee University is interested in creating Pleiades URIs that match with their digital and photographic modeling of places in Pompeii and Herculaneum with extant graffitos. So there really are almost sort of limitless potentials there in terms of creating connections, increasing granularity, and surfacing things in the Gazetteer that sort of find a home through these networks of connections. And I would say the last thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it back over to Valeria, is that Pleiades, being structured as it is, really relies upon its community of contributors and users. And so the user who has a massive data set that she or he wants to incorporate into Pleiades, we're definitely interested in talking with and working with that person. But we're also interested in working with the person who wants to make improvements or updates or changes to a single place that's important to that user, right? So it doesn't mean that to be a part of the Pleiades network, you have to have 2,000 data points that you're working with. If you have a special interest in a place or a handful of places, we still want to hear from you. And the strength of the data and the strength of the project really relies on what contributors are willing to bring as contributions.
Great, thank you, Jeffrey. That was a great introduction to Pleiades, and actually our exercise will involve creating real or mock Pleiades entries. So we will talk more about that possibly later. And also thank you for prompting my next topic, that is actually the urban gazetteers. So I will. I will just add a few words on this idea that Jeffrey quite nicely introduced, and that has become one of my main interests recently, which is, well, in the last years, which is increasing the granularity of gazetteers. So in the way that we have seen for Rome, for example, assigning a URI not just to the entire city, but to the specific building or to the specific place within the city. And this idea started growing on me when I was working on Pompeii, and I was looking for references and representations of a specific building in Pompeii, but I realized that in a lot of digital catalogs and digital libraries, the information didn't go further down than just saying Pompeii, which from a very practical point of view meant for me that I had to go through a lot of literature that was actually not useful to me, just to look for more precise references to what I was actually interested in. And one of the reasons why just a simple, text search wasn't gonna help me much, Ruth has very clearly shown. So there are obviously various languages, and there are also a lot of variants in the name of cities, but also in the name of single buildings. And that was especially true in Pompeii, where, I don't know, the creativity of archaeologists really, really reached some incredible peaks. And we went from, some slight variations, like for the Temple of Isis, that was pretty much always the same, to places like the Temple of Apollo that really collected bizarre names that had absolutely nothing to do with each other. And, the temple itself was attributed at various points to Venus, to Ceres, and it was quite amusingly also known as the House of the Dwarves for a while. But I think that, this page really gives an idea of how, as Ruth was saying, how useful it is to have a unique an identifier that is stable and that doesn't change, and that collects all these variant names so that people knows that we're still referring to the same building. And I thought that this was a huge this would have been a huge help for all people working on Pompeian resources, just thinking of putting together the names. But that is obviously not the only, let's say, applications of urban gazetteers. And one other benefit, I think, it would be to be able to make more precise and more specific links between things that are in archives and in collections, like, for example, museum catalogs and so on, and to say that that artifact, that object, that entity is related not just to the entire city, but to a specific place within the city. Because if we think of cities that have a very, very large archaeological and historical heritage, like Rome, for example, or Athens, or Istanbul, or even Pompeii, that is very small, but very, very much studied, just saying that an inscription, just saying that a vase comes from Rome, honestly doesn't say enough. To a macro level, of course, it says that it's Rome and that it's not, from India, but it also put it together with a lot of other things that just come from Rome, while it would be much more informative and much more useful to say that that epigraphy actually comes from that temple in Rome, that amphitheater in Pompeii, and so on. And this was a conversation that we were having also with Jonathan Prague when he was working on his iSicily project, and was getting a little bit frustrated by the lack of precision in the information that the museums had about their inscriptions. And he wanted, the digital version to be able to say, this inscription not only comes from, Palermo, but comes from, that specific necropolis near it, or that specific archaeological area near it, or even better, that particular and unique building. Another potential that I see for urban gazetteers became apparent to me when I was working on the Heritage Gazetteer of Libya, and we were creating URIs and entries for the buildings, the major buildings in the archaeological areas of Libyan cities. And I was creating polygons to describe the location of those buildings. And I realized that some of those buildings, this is a screenshot for the buildings in Berenike, some of those buildings are now partially or completely invisible. And the only way I had to trace those polygons was actually to do it looking at older published archaeological records. So I thought that actually urban gazetteers were a great way to record and to keep a memory of things that do not exist anymore, or to preserve preemptively the memory of things that may disappear, but also to compare let's say the different stages of life of a monument. So maybe having more than one polygon that belong to the same URI. So to, let's say, look at the biography of the single building. And these are just three main applications that I've seen just in my own research for urban gazetteers, and I became really more and more interested into this. And we had a workshop in Rome last May, and Jeffrey was joined us in Rome to discuss this, and we realized that well, urban gazetteers pretty much have all the same issues that historical gazetteers have, all the same challenges like unlocated places and vague information and uncertainty, as Jeffrey was saying. But we also identified some more specific issues that are really related to dealing with buildings instead of with cities. And just to give you, let's say, a flavor of the discussion that was going on, we talked about how to model the relationship between, let's say, the different incarnation of the same building. So when a building is destroyed and rebuilt, or receives a massive restoration, a massive change. So what is the relationship between, let's say, these two stages, these two manifestations of the building? And when is a change big enough that it makes the same entity a different place, it creates a new entity, let's say. And what it is the relationship between them? Are they simply related to each other, or are they also related to, let's say, a super entity that is more general, and it's a little bit like the idea of the place, like we see, like we have seen in the Pleiades model. But also, and this is really, really architecturally specific, what is the relationship between buildings that have been built using the same recognizable material? So one building has been, let's say, robbed and savaged to build another one. And we see that in Rome all the time. So are these two buildings the same place? Are they related? And what is the relationship that would better describe what happened there? And also, if we identify place, not just thinking of their physicality, but thinking of the function they perform in the city, what is the relationship between two completely separate and different buildings that have performed the same function? Are they related? Are they two instantiation of the same place? Actually, maybe the very first question is, what is part of an urban gazetteer? So when does something stop being an object and becomes a place? So it's a monument, a place. It's a famous statue in the street, a place. It's a milestone, a place. And where we draw the line. And obviously, we don't have any answer for any of these, but it was a very interesting discussion, I think, and I believe that it's useful to point out these theoretical, these conceptual issues. The only, I think, we came up with a couple of suggestions, and I think that these two, I like these two in particular. And one is, as Ruth was saying, don't try to make a complete gazetteer of of anything, because that is just too much. But start from a subset of the information you're interested in. So maybe a type of buildings. The map of early modern London, I think, started mapping print shops in early modern London, or start with the information that you can extract from a specific text or a specific map, and then get in touch with people that are working on other texts or other maps and try to put the work that you have done together. But also look at what already exists in other gazetteer at the intra-city level. As we have seen, there is already, for Rome, for example, there is already a lot of stuff in Pleiades as well as in the Digital Atlas of the Roman Empire, and try to decide what is the most efficient way to approach this, if you want to keep enriching an existing gazetteer, or if it is better to create a new one that is more specific, but still at that point definitely start from whatever is already available. And this was my I think I forgot to share my screen. You were not seeing my slides. Okay. Awesome. Okay, and no one could tell me because you were all muted. Amazing. Okay, I hope that was clear enough anyway. You can, I think we can now close our teaching time, let's say. You can all unmute yourself, and we can start with questions. And
well, maybe one thing. So, well, first of all, thank you very much for this session. And well, I think one important thing. So today we have seen one important aspect: textual geography, or the textuality of geography. Of course, as philologists, archaeologists, historians, we have been always looking for names of places in text. But nowadays, even more than before, we have this thing of collecting data, digital data, so names. So that's why I mentioned the textuality. And then we have to disambiguate, we have to work on these gazetteers. And then, as you said, Valeria, of course, we can't produce a complete gazetteer. Is impossible, also because we can have so many different perspectives that, fortunately or unfortunately, it's a never-ending work. I think that this is important for students, but probably they are more used than us, in the sense that, well, for example, I'm old enough to remember a world where we were using globes, atlases, or paper maps, but our students not. In fact, I'm not asking anymore my students if they have ever used a printed map, because they say no. And I don't ask them because I don't want to feel so old, but it's true. So in the sense that also in our everyday life, when we look for a place on our smartphone in Google Maps, most of the time we have to disambiguate the name we're looking for, the place we're looking for, and then we follow on the map when we drive or when we walk, we follow the earth. So in some way, this is interesting, because especially for students, I think they are more used than us, and probably than me, because I remember that world. And on the other side, this thing of following a map very precisely, in some ways like ancient people who had to describe the earth by walking. Of course, nowadays we have other resources, and if we zoom in or zoom out Google Maps, we can see the entire world or just a place. But I think this aspect textuality is really very important, and this is a new sensibility for geography. The other thing is about iSicily, because you mentioned iSicily, and this summer I had a possibility to travel in Sicily, and I could enjoy the great work done by Jonathan Prague and other people, because in many museums In Sicily, you can find information and you can get through a smartphone with the QR codes information about a specific inscription with many links to gazetteers and places. And of course, for every inscription, well, as you know, we have places of preservation, the place of discovery, etc. I can imagine the work, the incredible work done by Jonathan Prague, and how he can feel frustrated many times because it's a huge work, but I had the possibility to see the first results, and it's great because just with these QR codes you can get really a lot of information. So
yeah, I'm very pleased to hear that.
yes. And the community can contribute to his work, also adding pictures, for example. Another crazy job. Yeah.
I have a question for Ruth, if I may. How does the World Historical Gazetteer model relationship? Because Jeffrey talked about how Pleiades handle them and visualize them, and I very much like this idea, this model that a place is defined by the things that have relationship with it. So I was wondering how the WHG does it.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it is actually a live topic, this at our weekly kind of staff and project meetings right now. And I should also mention, I mentioned Carl Grossner, who's our developer. Yeah. I should also mention Ryan Horn, who Jeffrey also talked about, who worked at AWMC as a grad student and a postdoc, and is now my postdoc in the World Historical Gazetteer and the World History Center. So one of the several people whose presences are felt, even though they are not among us right now. So this is the trade-off with a lot of these projects, I think. Any kind of project that's intended to be a community project. The trade-off is that you can have a more interesting, semantically rich ontology that makes it possible to model some phenomenon in the world more precisely. A feature type thesaurus, for instance, for a single gazetteer. What are the range of things that exist in the world? What that names refer to, right? Is it a building? Is it a polity, etc.? And the relationship thesaurus is exactly that question. And so for any entities whose relationships are simply geometric, that is, as I mentioned in my talk, we're including watersheds, for instance, as well as cities and polities and so on. So easily, just simply geometrically, you can say that a certain watershed overlaps with the polygon of a certain polity. You don't need to model that semantically beyond that. So the question is how to deal with non-geometrical relationships. And so essentially, we have a range of, right, I think I said half of what I wanted to about the ontology. So you can have a better, a more elaborate ontology that allows for more specification of what phenomena in the world are like. And that's great. We're scholars. We like being able to describe things with precision. The problem is that in a project that's a shared community project, one person's precise, perfect, this is what the world looks like to me ontology is a straitjacket or a bafflement to someone else with a different kind of project. And so you can have an extremely open-ended ontology that makes it easy for everyone to find their way into it, but then just simply doesn't have as much semantic richness for being able to, for instance, search on the basis of whatever are the entities in that ontology. So this is really what we're literally debating through right now with the World Historical Gazetteer, is that for non-geometrical relationships, we could keep it extremely simple, simply doing related to, as Pleiades does. And we are strongly considering doing that. On the sort of the farther towards the other side is that the Getty Thesaurus of Geographical Names, or the Getty AAT, has a thesaurus of relationships that they've developed, and we would be able to uptake their ontology and not develop a new one. And I think it's always good. I mean, I think there should be a special, I don't know, there's so many unused ontologies out there. I don't think we should be developing new ontologies if we don't absolutely have to. So we're thinking of taking up the Getty AAT ontology, only a subset of which is about relationships of places to other places, since the larger Getty methodology, for instance, relates artworks to the museums that hold them, patrons to artists, etc. It's a really cool, big, interesting, I think pretty just, logical and not overdone generic ontology. And it includes, 24 or so place relationships. And we're thinking of uptaking that. Even that, though, what we're wondering is whether that's just too much, whether it's encumbering to users, whether it's kind of encumbering to data modeling, whether it's sort of exactly the wrong size as opposed to exactly the right size, because it doesn't account for any specific project, specific relationships. I mean, monuments to roads, to archaeological sites, to ancient polities, right? It's not specific enough for that, but it's not general enough to just be, there's a relationship, you work it out. And so the third and fourth thing we're talking about, the third possibility is to have an extremely stripped down ontology, but one that is a little bit more fleshed out than simply is related to. So it would allow, for instance, for parent-child relationships, and then for, I forget what we're thinking of them as, but other relationships, kind of, parent-child relationships, and then kind of peer relationships, sort of sister city type relationships, alliances, that sort of thing. So that's a third possibility. And then the fourth possibility is simply to allow people to specify their own relationships, basically specify their own ontology. So when somebody is using the World Historical Gazetteer, to be able to call out, I have this body of relationships, this is where I'm getting them from. I'm using Getty's, this other person is using their own home-cooked ontology, or one that's specific to their disciplinary community or something. So that wouldn't allow for searching across projects, but it would allow individuals or small communities gathering together within the World Historical Gazetteer community to be able to communicate with each other around relationships. So definitely, I think this is a sort of a no right answer kind of question, and it's a matter of what use cases can we imagine. And one of the reasons I think we're backing away from the idea of having a more fleshed out ontology that we are specifying as a recommended ontology is because it doesn't seem likely that anyone would organize searches around it. That is, how many people are going to say, show me all the places that were in colonial relationships, let's say, to other places at a particular moment in time. I don't know, maybe now that I'm saying it, I'm thinking, wow, how cool would that be? But it's something that's only worth sort of coding in if it seems like it's going to be widely used. So definitely an open question. At the very least, we'll have is related to, and then we're thinking about where to go beyond that.
Yeah, it's very difficult to find the right equilibrium there. That was the theme of all our digital classics seminar series, how to find the equilibrium between specificity and things that are general enough that are useful to everyone. I don't know if Jeffrey wants to add anything on this.
No, I would just say that Pleiades is also considering adopting parts of the Getty thesaurus, in that certainly there's the initial sort of iteration that was developed by Sean Gillies in Pleiades was connection, right, which could be an upstream or a downstream connection. And now there's more interest in sort of modeling different types of connections, physical geography ones, political geography. And so I think that I agree with Ruth completely that, you know, why reinvent the, you know, not just the wheel but the wagon too, you know, and let's just, you know, use things that are, you know, that are open, that we can all sort of, you know, deploy in our own ways. So I think that that's coming next for us, as is probably alignment or time periods with the periodo time. I don't know the formal name after what comes after the colon, but periodo is a time gazetteer for time periods. One of our hangups is still kind of trying to navigate around the time periods that start from the Barrington Atlas, which are too broad often for what you want to do in the digital space. Adding on time periods gotten from the TAVO, which are also a little bit awkward sometimes. And so periodo is appealing in terms of trying to model time period boundaries without getting caught up in labels, you know, and so those are things ahead for us, I think.
Cool. So thank you everyone very much. I think that we are running out of time. I just wanted to say for the students that the exercise you will find it described in the class page, and it's about creating entries for the Pleiades Gazetteer. You can request an account. There are all the instructions. I'm not sure that you will receive let's say an authorization and a confirmation of your account soon enough. If that doesn't happen, you can just, let's say, put in a spreadsheet all the information that you would have entered otherwise in a Pleiades entry for an ancient place that doesn't exist already. Okay, so thank you everyone very much for joining us. I'm stopping the broadcast now.